The old clock tower at Bellwood Academy struck 10. Each chime was a death knell. Inside the grand, suffocating silence of the library, 4 of us were huddled under a large oak table, our hearts hammering against our ribs. We were the fools who had stayed past lockdown. Outside the arched windows, a moonless sky pressed against the glass. But the real darkness was inside. Across from me, a senior named Mark shifted his weight. The old floorboard beneath him let out a soft, pitiful groan. It was a tiny sound. In any other place, at any other time, it would have been nothing. Here it was a scream. My roommate, Sam, squeezed his eyes shut, his knuckles white as he gripped an ancient textbook. Sarah, the girl next to me, muffled a sob into her sleeve. My own breath was a prisoner in my lungs. We all knew the rule, the only rule that mattered at Bellwood after the final bell. You do not make a sound. Mark froze, his face a mask of pure terror. He knew what he'd done. He looked at us, his eyes pleading. For a moment, there was nothing, just the thick, oppressive silence that was Bellwood's signature. Maybe it would be okay. Maybe the sound was too soft. Then it began. The silence around Mark started to deepen. It wasn't that the room got quieter. It was that the very concept of sound around him was being erased. The faint hum of the old library lights above him faded. The whisper of his own panicked breathing vanished. The frantic thumping of his heart, which I could almost feel from across the table, went quiet. He opened his mouth to scream, but no sound came out. He was a character in a movie, with the volume turned all the way down. He clawed at his throat, his silent scream a horrifying pantomime of terror. The space around him seemed to warp, the shadows clinging to him, drinking the light from his skin. He was becoming a photograph, a flat two-dimensional memory. Then, like a puff of smoke, he dissolved into the profound, absolute nothingness that now occupied the space where he had been. He was gone, erased. The silence retracted, its hunger satisfied for now, and the normal, heavy quiet of the library returned. I stared at the empty space, my body trembling. I came to Bellwood Academy to find out what happened to my brother Ethan, who vanished from this very library a year ago. I thought I was looking for a person. I was wrong. I was hunting a rule. And tonight, the rule was hunting me. Bellwood Academy wasn't just a school. It was a mausoleum of tradition, built on old money and older secrets. When I had arrived on a scholarship 2 months earlier, I was mesmerized by its Gothic spires and ivy-choked stone walls. It felt like stepping into another century. But after the sun went down, that grandeur became a suffocating dread. The very air grew heavy, pregnant with a silence that felt ancient and predatory. Sam, my roommate, and the school's unofficial historian, had explained the legend on my first night. It's called the Bellwood Silence, he'd whispered, his eyes wide in the dark of our dorm room. The story goes that back in the 1920s, the headmaster, Alistair Blackwood, was obsessed with discipline. He believed noise was the root of all chaos. One night, a prank fire alarm caused a massive panic, and a student was tragically trampled to death. Blackwood was broken by it. They say he made a pact with something dark, to ensure perfect, absolute silence would reign over his school after dark. He used an old occult bell to seal the deal. I had dismissed it as a ghost story, a hazing ritual for the new kid. But then I found the note. It was tucked into the spine of a book in Ethan's old locker, a book I knew was his favorite. His handwriting was a frantic scrawl. It's not a ghost, Leo, it's a rule. It's a presence that feeds on sound. Whatever you do, do not make a sound after 10 p.m. It hears everything. It erases everything. Now, hiding in the library, watching the empty space where Mark had been, Ethan's words were a roaring fire in my mind. Sam and Sarah were catatonic with fear. We had been working on a project, lost track of time, and the librarian had locked up without checking the back tables. We were trapped. What do we do? Sarah finally whispered, the sound so tiny it was barely there. We wait for morning, I mouthed, not daring to speak. We stay here, we don't move, we don't make a sound. But the silence was patient. It was also hungry. An hour crept by, each second a lifetime. Then a new sound entered the library. A soft, rhythmic weeping. It was coming from the far end of the room, near the archives. It was the sound of a young girl crying. Don't listen, Sam mouthed, his face ashen. It's a trap. It's trying to make us react. The weeping grew louder, more desperate. It was a sound designed to claw at your soul. Sarah, whose younger sister had been sick, was visibly struggling. Tears streamed down her face. She was biting her lips so hard, I could see a drop of blood welling up. Then, a book on a high shelf directly above her wiggled. It tipped, it fell. It was a slow-motion nightmare. Sarah looked up, her eyes wide. She let out an involuntary gasp, a sharp intake of breath that cut through the silence like a razor. The weeping stopped. The silence turned its attention to her. The process began again, that horrifying erasure of sound, light, and life. Sam and I watched, helpless, as the darkness consumed her. She vanished, leaving only the fallen book on the floor. Now there were two. The archives. I mouthed to Sam, my mind racing. The legend, the headmaster, the bell. The answer has to be in the archives. We can't just wait here to die. Sam looked at me, his eyes filled with a terror so profound I thought he might break. But then, a flicker of resolve hardened his gaze. He nodded. Our survival depended on moving through a hunting ground where a single misplaced footstep meant oblivion. We had to cross the entire library, a minefield of creaky floorboards and scattered books, to reach the archives. The hunt was on. Moving through the library was the most terrifying thing I have ever done. We moved in inches, timing our steps with the groan of the old building, our bare feet making no purchase on the cold stone. The silence was a physical presence now, a cold pressure in the air, a predator watching from every shadow. We made it to the archives, a cramped, musty room filled with forgotten school history. We frantically searched for anything related to Alistair Blackwood. We found his private journal tucked away in a locked box. Inside, his elegant cursive detailed his descent into madness. He wrote of the Pact of Silence, of an entity he had summoned to be his warden of peace. The bell, the abyssal bell, Sam whispered, his voice barely a tremor. He writes that the curse is bound to it. It's hidden in the one place no one would ever go after dark, the clock tower. The journal also spoke of a weakness. The entity, the silence, was a being of absolute order. It despised chaos. The pact was sealed in silence and could only be broken by its opposite. A sudden, violent, chaotic noise, the very thing Blackwood had sought to eliminate. A plan, insane and desperate, formed in my mind. The old manual fire alarm. The journal had a map. There was one right next to the bell in the clock tower. Getting there was a suicide mission, but it was our only chance. We crept out of the archives, our path taking us through the main hall. And that's where we saw him. Standing at the base of the grand staircase leading to the tower was a tall, spectral figure in a 1920s headmaster's suit, Alistair Blackwood. His face was a pale, emotionless mask, and his eyes were hollow pits of shadow. He was the Guardian. He turned his head slowly, his gaze locking onto ours. He didn't move. He didn't have to. He was the master of the silence. And he had found us. He raised a single spectral finger and pointed at Sam. The silence began to converge on him. Sam looked at me, his face a mixture of terror and grim acceptance. "The fire alarm, Leo," he mouthed. "It was the alarm that started it all. It's the only way." He took a deep breath, and then he did the bravest thing I have ever seen. He screamed. It was a raw, defiant, human sound that was instantly swallowed by the nothingness. But it was a diversion, as the silence and Blackwood's ghost focused entirely on erasing my friend. I ran. I sprinted up the stairs, my footsteps echoing like thunderclaps in a world that shouldn't have them. The ghost of Blackwood turned, his face contorting in rage. But he was too slow. The silence was still consuming Sam. I burst into the bell chamber. There, in the center of the room, was a large, black, ornate bell, covered in strange symbols, the abyssal bell, and on the wall next to it was a small, red, manual fire alarm box, with tears streaming down my face for the friend I had lost, for the brother I would never see again. I smashed the glass and pulled the lever. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, a sound erupted that had not been heard in these halls for a century. A deafening, continuous, chaotic ringing. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The abyssal bell cracked. The silence shrieked, a sound I could feel in my bones, a sound of pure agony as its ordered world was shattered by the chaos of the alarm. It imploded, a vortex of shadow collapsing in on itself until it was gone. The ghost of Alistair Blackwood flickered and faded, his curse finally broken. The last thing I remember is the glorious, painful ringing of the alarm. As I collapsed onto the floor, the heavy silence of Bellwood Academy finally, and forever, shattered. The silence is broken, but the nightmares remain. What's the creepiest rule or legend from your school? Let me know in the comments below, and if you want more stories that will keep you up at night, make sure to subscribe.